So next, we'll have my dear colleague, Professor Masic.
Yeah. Yeah, we have Professor Admir. So I'm gonna stop my sharing. So I don't know.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. So let me share my screen and be able to start. Ask.
Can I present you Professor
Yeah, please
Admir?
go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead while I'm doing this.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, Professor Admir is an associate professor in civil and environmental engineering at MIT. Masic Lab investigates the nanomechanics of mineralization and the biomineralization process of the materials, from construction material to biological material. The research projects that span from Roman concrete to random Portland cement, from nacre to kidney stones, from ancient color to dead sea scrolls. The main goal of Professor Admir Lab to translate the fundamental knowledge gained into the lab to the real application. Professor Admir has a lot of papers and contributed in different activity. And Professor Admir gonna present the presentation today about mechanistic insight into early stage of hydration and C2 micromineralization of ordinary Portland cement. And actually, we finalized by this presentation, by this excellent presentation from excellent Professor Admir. So go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. I mean, if you're still here, you are definitely fan of my lab, okay? And what I'm doing, and thank you for organizing us for the invitation to present quite preliminary and early work on hydration and CO2 mineralization, but also I would take the opportunity here to present a little bit my lab. Nancy nicely introduced it. Sounded a lot of things, but there is a logic behind, and logic is definitely, looking for materials that might give us some ideas and leads to advance our materials design, and we do this through multi-scale characterization tools that are generally developed within my lab. Main goal in this specific work that I will be presenting here is really to understand fundamental processes that are occurring in real world in cementitious matrix materials. So this is my outline, and fortunately there were so many amazing talks today that introduced the problem and talks a lot about cement chemistry. So I will probably fly over most of the introductory slides, and then I will focus on really time-space resolved Raman chemical deconvolution of cementitious hydration process, which is the method I will be presenting today to you, and also show some results and applications. And if we find time, it depends how fast I will be in going through these previous moduli. I hope to present also some very recent results on Roman concrete structure and properties. So we learned today that concrete is an outstanding material, and from many talks, we realized that we are not gonna go far from what we have now. And the reasons are clear. It's strong, durable, and versatile material. And most of all, it's extremely cheap compared to other materials. And if you think of, let me just see a pointer. Here we go. If we talk about, relationship cost versus strength, so concrete is just great. Of course, we have seen this slide already in Karin's Scrivener's talk, And it's a great material indeed, even from the footprint standpoint. It's on the left bottom side of this logarithmic graph. So remember, logarithmic means huge differences, and so it's a great material even from this side. But of course, if we then look at the tons of the material that is produced, unfortunately, these even small numbers here then become extremely high and of big impact globally. So yeah, we know very well now after this conference, I think, where this carbon footprint comes from. And of course, it's calcium carbonate, limestone degradation that leads to the emission of CO2, and these emissions combined with burning of fuels and some cost for transportation and grinding in terms of CO2 equivalents leads to that impact. And the temperature is very high to calcine and produce the clinker. So that's a very, very CO2 intense process. The problem is that our modern ordinary Portland cement then takes a route of hydration instead of carbonation, even though you will learn, and you already learned today, that the carbonation occurs as well. But in theory, what we aim for is this calcium silicate hydrate that will give us the strength and of course some other products due to additives like a gypsum, and there is also belite and so on. I mean, we know quite well the chemistry, and it's interesting that we don't know much about early stages of hydration of cement, and this is a general, representation of concrete hydration, the early stages where we have a clinker that hydrates, and the CSH is formed and eventually fills the pores and so on. Calcium hydroxide is also formed, and these images are actually very recent paper we published where we were able to track all these phases forming across 24 hours. So this is the focus of my talk today. Of course, you also learned that there are strategies that are currently being used or under investigation. So BOLD is currently used, and not BOLD text is research projects where, and some solutions, of course, at the early stages, where we aim to reduce the carbon footprint of this material. So I'm really not gonna go through this slide. I will just say that and repeat again that our big challenge is the neutrality by 2050 and the half reduction by in next 10 years. So difficult challenge. You learn that, and in my opinion, this is where we should go when it comes to really making this material sustainable. I do believe there is a huge room for CO2 to put back into cement and concrete through CO2 sequestration. I think we need to improve, doing maybe less by design, so making less and using less material and optimizing design. And many of my colleagues are interested in this, especially when it goes into 3D printing of complex concrete and mortar structures. And of course, I think biology is a great place to look for these anisotropic maybe structures from both nanoscopic scale level up to the macroscopic scale, and I think bio-inspired cement is really an interesting candidate, also because biology is specialized to carbonate CO2 and create extremely high-performing composites, biological composites. So next point here is durability. We need to make our infrastructure more resilient, and I think a great model that we studied in our lab, and again, I will try to share some of these results today, is Raman concrete and self-healing properties of this ancient material that is able to, withstand environmental challenges through 2,000 years, and of course with its own characteristics, but still extremely resilient material that evidently has self-healing properties. Last but not least, and you heard just from Nancy, very interesting material that is self-heating with a potential energy storage, conductive concrete, and all this I think is the future of our material that we will be able to put in practice quite soon, relatively soon, and it is a multifunctional material. So I think multifunctionality is the key word for the future of what we are doing. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about time-space resolved chemical. So Raman, the convolution of cement hydration process, and why concrete is so versatile, because it's workability is really great. You can make any a shape from a slurry, and then this hardens and goes into a rock. Of course, this hydration process that I mentioned already is very well studied with different stages, and we are kind of able to predict when the setting occurs. Of course, this is a Vickert test and a calorimetry exam, and setting happens in this case at about 6 or 7 hours, more or less 6 hours. So the point here, and I like to use this citation from publication of Henry Van Dam, says that concrete is a remarkably rich deposit of interesting and contemporary research questions, all contained in its ambiguities: granular or continuous, liquid or solid, crystalline or glassy, smooth or rough, porous, brittle or ductile, material or process. So really, there is a huge need for more knowledge on concrete chemistry. That's what I felt when I entered this field from biomineralization standpoint. I thought that we really need to nail down better the processes that are occurring while this material is evolving in time and going from strength 0 to 100% over 28 days. So how do we study complex composite materials? They are multi-scale, they are hierarchical. We have heard so many times today a story about nanoscale, macroscale, and mesoscale, and the multi-phase. There are many phases. Great talk from Claire telling us how difficult it is to really predict properties based on composition that is very heterogeneous. And unfortunately, on top of this, we have also changing. And so what we need is really a high spatial, high chemical sensitivity, high spatial resolution, high chemical sensitivity, and high temporal resolution to actually capture all this in one shot. And you will realized that there is a tool that is called Raman Spectroscopy that has high spatial, temporal, and spectral resolution to tackle this problem. Just for our undergrads here in the audience, Raman Spectroscopy is a technique that basically probes molecules and molecular vibrations, and we shine a light, photon, generally laser, on our sample, and this sample gets excited, and through the transformation from ground state into virtual state relaxes, but some of these relaxations are accompanied by an elastic scattering of a photon of light that actually now carries a shift. These shifts, so these differences in light energy, then will give us fingerprint for each of the material that we investigate using this tool, and that fingerprint then carries a lot of interesting information that is actually very local around that vibrational unit. So it's a molecular information, short range order interactions that are basically evidenced in these spectra, and peak intensity, peak shift, peak width, polarization, sensitivity. All these tools, all these details about the peaks will inform us about this unit that is vibrating. So you see from this very big slide that I've spent some time using this tool to look into many different materials, and it's more than a decade now that I'm using systematically these tools to study biological and man-made materials. And you see here, I don't know, bones of a zebrafish. Here is the recent paper on nacre. We studied the giant squid sucker rings, and I don't know, the composite material on the surface of these clubs from the smashers of stomatopod. I don't know. This is actually part that I will be showing to you. And here is the like a mineralization in breast cancer. And this is a Roman concrete and cementitious material. So let me focus on this bottom right part of this complex slide. Here Raman spectroscopy and cement chemistry. Raman had a kind of a limited applications due to a poor signal to noise. And generally, because the cement is very heterogeneous, we learned that. Often there are some trace metals that would absorb laser and then emit a fluorescence signal that would cover entire spectrum. And indeed, here we have signals that are one spectrum, and then we get these hydration products. Quite challenging experiments done in 70s and 90s. But then with the optical microscope integration and especially with confocal microscopy, we were able to focus this laser to a very small volume that eventually, with a limit, amount of these trace metal elements or maybe other sources of fluorescence, and eventually we were able to get this. We are talking about 2019 and 2021, so very recent work. The cool of this most recent paper is that we do it underwater conditions, means that basically processes occur very similar to what they would do in the real world conditions. So we call it operando. Okay. So this is the student that spent a lot of time in, nailing down all the experimental details to use efficiently Raman spectroscopy, so confocal Raman microscope, to do in situ Raman while sample occurs underwater. Turns out that this water is really cool because it dissipates heat, potential heat that is created by a laser interacting with the sample, and indeed I said that it's close to real world. And what we can do, we can basically monitor most of the initial chemistries and then also eventually understand the hydration products. So as I said, Chad definitely spent some time in developing the method that is outlined in this paper. So we can do time dependent. So it's a 4D data structure. X, Y is for the space, time, and wave number is another dimension. And so we can get a lot of information. And of course, in general, we collect it quite quickly at about 300 milliseconds for each of these spectra here. And this basically allows you to go really fast and get thousands, hundreds of thousands of spectra, which is really valuable then for statistical purposes. So here we can also then post-process these cubes, get maybe basis spectra, which would look something like this, and each of these you see have specific characteristic peaks of these molecular unit vibrations that would give us that fingerprint for each of these molecules, including water, of course. So you see, we can then, of course, focus and look at the peak profile. For example, for chemical environments, you learned that before I mentioned that peak position and shape will inform on the environment. And if we, for example, focus here on our spectrum of CSH, I like that, and also CH, calcium hydroxide. We will notice by careful analysis of these peaks, position and shapes that actually OH, for example, peak associated with calcium hydroxide that is typically very sharp because when it crystallizes very, very nicely and is at about 3614, shifts in some of these stages here and broadens. This basically tells us that the structure in this intermediate state is not yet crystalline, but is somehow disordered, that is immediately picked by this peak position and width. That then allows you to maybe plot the position of the peak and the width. We can extract it through peak fitting of that specific peak. Data and then plot them, and you see we get results like these, where you see peak width here on Y and peak position on X are moving. You see from as the time proceeds. So now we are at 14 hours, 15 hours green, and you see that basically at 19 hours we moved to a specific peak position here and specific width, whereas we started, you see, with a disordered the calcium hydroxide. So very, very sensitive and spatially resolved as well tool. If we look at this kind of broad and peak that remains underneath of the calcium hydroxide, we notice that this is a peak of CSH, and of course it's broadened because it's disordered in general, and we're using these this deconvolution here, we were able to confirm the Gartner's model for defective tobermorite CSH, at least in this specific case we studied. And here is like the standard ordinary Portland cement sample. So the cool, I said, is also that we can actually get spatial resolution, not only temporal and spectral, but also spatial resolution. So you see these are basically snapshots of that video, and you can nicely already see that basically, for example, in this corner here, there's a lot of calcium hydroxide forming inside here, and then you can actually analyze this through correlation functions, and you can get the volume fraction, cluster size, microns, just by analyzing these images and characteristic distance. And what we found out is that calcium hydroxide crystallizes far from C3S allied clusters, which is to be expected, and CSH crystallizes on the surface of allied setting. Occurs when C3S, CSH, and CH calcium hydroxide form an interconnected network, which is really, really obvious from these data. And this is the basically model we were able to outline. It's that what is quite new and cool is that the calcium, once created through hydration of allied, moves into pores as a disordered calcium hydroxide, and then crystallizes, and then you see this grows with time, and then when everything is connected, we get setting. So that's at the 24 hours. Of course, Chad did a further push and analyzed the same sample over a longer time, our magical 28 days, and so when the strength is reaching its maximum, and you see we can kind of nicely see that green is belite, doesn't do much till a certain point, and starts to react. 7 days, so we see some reactivity, whereas basically allied is gone, and a lot of connected CSH is formed. Okay, so this is kind of image that you can get. I introduced this slide simply because I wanted to show that there is a calcite. We can put some calcium carbonate inert material there, and then basically have some references, but also in the perspective, we'll see this can be easily studied. But here we can see that after 7 days, you see allied basically is consumed in one, but still present in other grain, and there are different parts of CSH that are formed. One that goes inside the grain, other that grows on top of the grain, and so you can do all these kind of investigations. And indeed, what happens if we have CO2 in the solution? And that's the question that then connects nicely with the objective to use cementitious materials as carbon sink, and of course there is so much enthusiasm around this work, and I think there will be a lot of progress here, and these are just a few of the companies, startups that I picked from internet, and you probably know very well all of these, but it's very much about how can we move some anthropogenic CO2 into the material and keep it there forever, permanently. And what I've done with my colleague, my student margin, we monitored a little bit the hydration of C3S using the similar setup together with the bicarbonate, and what was really cool here is to see carbonation that is overlapping clearly CSH formation. This red and blue overlapped means pink, and basically if you see pink in this image, you know that these are always together, and that somehow connects with also talks that we heard today about the calcium carbonate formation, calcium carbonate, seeding for CSH formation, and I think here we are opening an incredible opportunity for investigating clear microscale reactivity of CO2 in a complex cementitious material, because now you could imagine that while a C3S is hydrating, it will produce CSHs, but also calcium hydroxide. Calcium hydroxide will interact with CO2. Where it is interacting, at which stage, which phases are involved? Are there nanoparticles that perhaps will start seeding CSH, and probably it's what is happening, because my disorder, the calcium hydroxide and eventually calcium carbonate, if the CO2 is present, might be of the nanoscale, and that's a good guess, because the broadening is also often due to the surface deformation of nanoscopic features, and so there is a lot of work here to be done. I will return to cite my friend Van Dam that published in 1998, addition of very fine calcium carbonate particles accelerates the early hydration reaction rate. But we see this also through many works that are recently appeared through pumping CO2 into fresh cement. But of course, we learned today also the other side of this metal, and how the CO2 will eventually play a role in degradation. But of course, also encouraging numbers from modeling are clear that there is a huge uptake by carbonating cement over last 5 to 10 decades. So this is definitely something that we should look more closely into. And here I will leave you with this image of 3D printed mortar where we clearly see huge carbonation. This peak of 1084 is in the range of calcite, and of course there are many phases that are formed, that there are little peaks that can be analyzed that are aragonite or other polymorphs, but everything can be clearly contextualized in such a complex material. Good. So how much time do I have? Not much, actually. I think I might, I don't know if you allow me 5 minutes.
You have the floor. You have the floor. You can take
Okay, I will quickly go through self-healing and Raman concrete, because it's just an amazing material. I will use next 5 minutes to do so. And as I said, Raman concrete not only is extremely durable, but it often uses recycled materials and requires less energy to produce. So it's worth looking into it. And generally, it's a mix of volcanic ash, sand, aggregate, and lime, of course, then mixed with water, and then this hydraulic lime cement is created and binds sand in the mortar, and then big aggregates then do the shape. Of course, hydraulic mortar means that we have this pozzolanic reaction that, in general, because of the type of the volcanic ash we use, we get rheomans used. We get calcium, aluminum silicate hydrates. Of course, durability is something that is, of course, of our interest. And it's very well studied by my colleague, Marie Jackson. And Marie demonstrated through several works that, fluids, supersaturated calcium, silicon, aluminum, sodium, and potassium, eventually, after the pozzolanic reaction occurred, so on the long time scale, crystallize in some phases that then, basically fill the vesicles, relict the gas bubbles and interfacial zones and pore space, so fill everything. Of course, one important question that we asked in our lab is, what is the source of calcium ions to do this post-pozzolanic reactions, and how relict lime clasts, which are ubiquitous elements of Roman concretes. Here is one of those like white chunks. How these clasts are formed in ancient samples, and can they be missing link in self-healing pictures? So these are questions we asked them. And here is the recent paper we published on reactivity of these volcanic components, which were nicely studied using Raman spectroscopy. So where we were able to indeed identify aluminum taubermorite, stranthligite in the Roman part, interfacial zone, but also binding phase as a CaSH. At the interface, which eventually, led us to think of confirming, the extreme reactivity over a long time of the interfacial zone, and it looks like it's constantly evolving through long-term remodeling. Another paper that is about to be published is the same story, but now with this, materials that we make. So cacio so these are ceramic man-made materials that were introduced when volcanic ash was scarce, and or in the applications for water-related infrastructure, so aqueducts, thermas, and things like that. And also in this case, we observe the same reactivity of these now anthropogenic, man-made inclusions through very similar reactivity, CaSH calcite. What we observed also, and this is now connected with the next slides, is that there is a lot of calcite everywhere, and we, including cracks. You see this crack here. It's filled with calcite, and that actually very nicely fit with what we explored in the lab. Is this are these lime clasts that relict lime clasts basically were thought to be only the products of bad mixing of the concrete, and eventually would remain there inert, more or less. But what we then figured out using scanning electron microscopy, and especially Raman spectroscopy, while we looked into this, is that these guys are not uniform, and also show very specific phases. In this case, this yellow phase that is different from the red phase, because you see big shifts. And we were able to correlate these yellow phases to a process where actually, instead of using slaked lime, Romans might have used a partially quicklime. And this hot mixing, that is the very well-known process, eventually could introduce new features, including the lime clasts, into our concrete mix. And that was really exciting, because eventually we tested it in a standard ordinary Portland cement situation, and it's really what happens. But if you now systematically create these inclusions that are potentially a source of calcium for all the reactions that we observe, that means that you are able to produce something that perhaps incorporates reservoirs of agent that eventually will lead to some reactivity over time. And indeed, this image is very beautiful because it shows you the shift of calcium, silicon, aluminum ternary diagram from very rich in calcium that are blue. These are our lime clasts into red zone. And red zone, you see it's enriched with silicon and aluminum. And somehow you see that this goes constantly from each of these little blue aggregates. So very suggesting, that there is some effect of these aggregates to the surrounding matrix. And we protected this with a patent that then led to a new startup that you might hear of soon, and eventually, I would conclude with this final slide where I really believe that sustainable concrete with a multifunctional features might be the key to creating something that is not only structural, but also maybe leads to 3D printing, or you have seen the potential of conductive cement, maybe create batteries, and of course, if we do all this through a self-healing material, it's really exciting field to tap in. So with this, sorry for going over time. I'm the last, so I don't affect anyone else apart you. And if you are still here, I'm happy to answer any question.
Thank you so much, Professor Admir Masic, for this very interesting presentation. Actually, we have still a lot of audience are still here.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Question for you. The first question is that, was the Raman spectroscopy done at real water cement ratios like 0.4, 0.6?
Yeah.
Or higher?
No, we went to the standard. I think it was 0.5 in this specific experiments, but we can change that as we want. Yeah.
Okay. So the second question: can this operando spectroscopy procedure be applied to analyze very early age CO2 mineralization and CO2 injected cementitious system?
Yeah, this is exactly the slide I showed, and we are actively working on this. Yeah. Student is very much committed, and we are happy to talk about this. And yeah, it's the great potential, because you see all the chemistry that might happen, including amorphous phases that I think are probably the most challenging phase to look at when it comes to X-ray, standard X-ray scattering tools, and I think Raman holds that promise. Definitely was very successful in nailing amorphous phases in biological materials and biomineralization, including early stages of bone formation or skeleton formation, because biology operates through amorphous phases. And I do see some analogy in cementitious materials, especially if you talk about CSH and other phases look like undergoing amorphous phase precursors through amorphous phase precursors that might be captured in the early stage using these tools.
Oh, really good. So third question is, can the calcite present in cement and those formed through CO2 mineralization be differentiated through this methodology?
I think it's the same question, isn't it? I didn't get the first part. Can you say again?
he said, can the calcite present in cement and those formed through CO2 mineralization be differentiated through this methodology?
Oh, I see. Yeah, calcite will have a one specific phase, so spectrum fingerprint cannot be differentiated with other calcite, apart if maybe it's very nanoparticles, so where size we are talking about really like 4 nanometers, where basically surface dominates and eventually it's not crystal anymore. So your environment, your peak will broaden, even though it's calcite in theory or incipient calcite. So calcite, geological, and CO2 will not be differentiated, but all other phases different from calcite, such as aragonite, we have seen today that it's formed, such as laterite, we have seen that it's formed, such as amorphous calcium carbonate that we don't know if it is forming, and that's basically topic of my next paper I'm writing, and can be distinguished. Yeah.
Very good. Professor Giri he said, this is a wonderful tool for studying phase transformation, and he's asking, what is the smallest spatial resolution? I see.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay, sorry. There is still going. Go ahead.
Just like he said, I see speckle domains that seems to be a submicron size.
Yeah. So the spatial resolution is dictated by the confocal microscopy. Means that the best we can get is 300 nanometers laterally, and maybe 600 to 700 nanometers in depth. For cementitious materials, generally depth is not so important because it's not transparent. But laterally, so in general, we achieve 500 nanometers, no problem in lateral resolution, and you cannot go beyond because it's a confocal microscopy. Even though that scale, I think it's extremely important for cementitious materials. So I think it's definitely worth exploring. And let's say the signal you get then can be resolved also because the signal is generated by short range interactions, means that basically your spectra will picture the molecular level, even though your resolution, spatial resolution is much bigger than molecules.
Okay, now, next question is regarding the movie in slide 7. It seems like CSH completely consumed C3S in a very short time. Is it actually the case, or this is because the C3S grain gets covered from its top by CSH?
Yeah, so I think, let me go to slide 7 quickly. I think that was actually, green was a C2S. So let's see if this is connected. So if I go here, slide 7, do you see my slides?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the movie. So white is the white in this case is C3S, okay? And white disappears indeed in this specific volume over 14 hours. Still some is left here on top, you see. Green remains there, it's a C2S, so Bella. So that's what it is. I don't know. I mean, you need to realize that this is, 100 microns, okay? So some bigger grains of C3S will probably be around that we didn't capture in this specific image. Okay. So and of course, we analyzed all this through.
He's talking about C3S.
Yeah, C3S. That's what we are talking about. But here we did these kind of things, and you see C3S, for example, cluster size and volume fraction. Yeah, indeed, it does go quite low quickly. Yeah, you are right in this specific case. It's again this image, okay?
Good. So,
but I'm sure that there are aggregates that do not react because you have seen it here, for example, that is still there.
So one more question is here. So very insight presentation for the self-healing understanding of Roman concrete. Have you been able to mimic their volcanic ash-based concrete mix? And is there any indication of the lime cycle in their concrete?
Oh yeah, so this is really great question. I mean, yeah, we know more or less how Romans made it, and we follow Vitruvius. I have a great slide that I took out because of the time about, you know, how do we reproduce Roman concrete, and we basically go and look at the Vitruvius 10 books of architecture, and then we translate from Latin what he says, and if you look at what he said, for example, here in one of these, I'm trying to go here. Here we go. So it says, therefore, when three substances formed in a similar manner by the violence of fire, three substances, basically volcanic ash, lime, and what is the third one? Sorry. I think in this case is like some additional aggregates that they would put into one mixture and take on the moisture all at once. So they take all at once, including the lime, okay? They cohere, and therefore, when unlike the unequal substances are caught together and brought into one nature, the hot desiccation suddenly saturated with water, basically leads to latent heat in the bodies affected and causes them to combine vehemently and to gain rapidly one strong solidity. I mean, you see, this is our kind of interpretation of these books and translations, and this is where we start with. We in theory know how they would do it, but there are some details that actually we lost over 2,000 years, and now putting volcanic ash there, and is definitely the key for the certain type of reactivity. But the lime cycle, I think it's the very important component, and it's completely different from what we are used to use now in the modern time with the development of ordinary Portland cement. So that factor, I think, is at least we in our lab believe that that's the key, even though, of course, there are other components that are important in all these processes.
Very good. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we come to the end of our day.
Thank you so much for the invite again.
Thank you.
All right.